Welcome to the Secure CIO, the podcast for technology executives who are tasked with hiring and retaining great cybersecurity leaders. Join best-selling author Claire Pales together with industry thought leaders as they answer your questions about sourcing the right leaders, building cybersecurity teams, candidate selection, salaries, skills, and more.
Hello, I'm Claire Pales and welcome to the Secure CIO podcast. Today's guest is Jo McConnell. Jo is passionate about leading positive change both in business and society. With a 25-year corporate career in people and culture across various industries and countries, Jo's career has culminated in founding a new consulting business, The People Collective. They bring a unique perspective to helping complex, fast-paced businesses change, grow and perform, becoming places where the very best people want to work. Jo, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a bit about you and how you got to where you are in your career today.
Kind of a long story, but I'll synthesize it down. 25-year career, which has ended up, as you said, in starting my own people and culture consulting business over the last little while. I've also taken on a not-for-profit CEO role, so I'm leading a charity called the Gomo Foundation, which supports girls in Zimbabwe to finish their high school education. So I'm doing, in 2022, really new things, my own consulting business and leading a charity for the first time. What led me to there is a 25-year career in corporate Australia, BHP for 20 years, various IR, HR, people and cultural roles, both here in Australia, Canada, the UK, so right across different commodity groups and right across their business. And for the last 3-4 years, I've worked in a private equity company called Latitude Financial. So I learned a lot more, frankly, about infosec, digital technology, and the whole financial services sector in that time. So nice, diverse career, and this year is a big change for me, which is exciting.
So given your experience in HR and people leadership across the last 25 years, I want to focus on a few key areas, particularly leadership and retention, and with, as you say, the security lens, particularly with our audience. So first, if we dive into leadership, the path of security leaders is quite a diverse one, and we often have quite technical experts who are promoted into leadership. And one thing I've noticed is that unless that leader is promoted to become skilled in leadership, often organisations or managers don't focus on this area of professional development. And I know that I'm generalising and this isn't specific to security, but I think this occurs across senior levels of business. So in your experience, how can we evolve and nurture leadership skills in a security leader to help their success and also to help their retention?
I've seen this challenge, particularly in very technical career pathways, so mining engineers, geologists, chemists, etc. in my sort of old life. And I think being a great leader requires you to have seen and been part of teams that have had great leaders early in your career. You can't be what you can't see, using that expression. So I would encourage people not to rely on their company providing them with some leadership development training. And of course, that's wonderful if you have that opportunity, and you should absolutely be putting your hand up for it. But early in your career, if you aspire to lead people and you aspire to, be a great leader, be curious about the leaders who you have. Think about, are they a good leader or are they not good leader? What are the traits that make them good, or what are the traits that make them not so good? You can learn as much from a, not so great leader as you can from a fabulous leader. Be curious early on. Read. I'm a big proponent of reading. There's lots of great books. There's hundreds and thousands of great books on leadership, but I'm a fan of Brené Brown. She writes very, very well about sort of empathetic, authentic leaders, vulnerable leaders. A really good place to start. Turn the Ship Around is a classic book as well, by David Marquette. If you start with a curiosity about leaders, you observe what's in your environment, and you make yourself open to that, I think you can do a lot of your own development rather than waiting for your company to invite you on a leadership development program.
And so if you then put yourself in the CIO's shoes, who is generally the person leading these security professionals, from their perspective, what does it really take for them to develop their direct reports into great leaders?
The best leaders I've worked for are those who actually see it as a core component of their job to be a great leader, firstly, and to develop great leaders. Too many people, particularly when they're, everyone's really busy these days, of course. Too many people kind of have being a great leader as a bit of an afterthought. Put it the first thing on your KPIs. Put it the first thing that you think about every day that you come into work. To care and nurture the people within your team, to communicate, to provide context every day, to run a tight ship in terms of, accountabilities and tasks, and all of those things together create great teams. But be deliberate about it. As I said, too many people in my experience don't consciously and deliberately think about how they show up every day as a leader. And it is a learnt habit. It's a learnt skill. You can observe lots of great people, but until you actually create the discipline and habit of being a great leader, putting aside time for that, asking for feedback for your team. Again, the best leaders are constantly asking, how am I going? Am I supporting you well enough? What else can I do? Build that into your daily habits and routines. Put it in your calendar, just like you would anything else that you're trying to achieve.
Being quite deliberate in your approach to leadership. And I love the idea that you mentioned earlier that you can learn as much from a not so great leader as you can learn from a leader. And that's such an important piece of advice, I think, for security leaders as well, because they have to remember, or we all have to remember, that we are role models for people. And I think sometimes gets forgotten as well, that in the workplace, we're constantly being watched, and constantly people are reflecting on our own leadership skills and trying to learn from us. So being deliberate about exhibiting good skills and making, I guess, good decisions is something that you have to be very conscious of.
And being a leader kind of, creeps up in you. It certainly did in my career, because you're sort of part of the team, then you're sort of leading a group of peers, a small team, and then all of a sudden, if you're lucky enough, you're leading a large team, and it takes a while for you to really internalize the consequence of that. And as a senior leader, people are constantly looking at you. I remember vividly in my old role, a number of years ago, I was going through, there's a bit of stuff going on, shall we say, in the business. And I remember one of the ladies from the call centre came up to me while I was getting a coffee downstairs going, "Jo, are you okay? You just haven't really seemed to be yourself lately." And that was a huge reminder that, she was just seeing me walk the floors. And obviously I was just showing up in a really different way. That, again, really good reminder. And I was so thankful that I had, created that relationship. So she was able to say that to me because it was a fantastic reminder. But people are watching all the time. Whether you're leading a team of 5 or 5,000 as a leader, people are watching you. They're taking cues from you every day. So again, little habits, and, I used to put a diary note in my calendar, 8:30 every morning, think about how I want to show up today, think about what I want to achieve. Just, little cues and habits that can really help. And if you establish those early in your career, they stand you in great stead for when you become the CIO and you've got, big teams.
I think that's a really good point. Back to what we were saying earlier about technical people not being taught how to be leaders, those types of tips, people don't necessarily know that stuff or think about that stuff, let alone the skills you need, in the kind of day-to-day workings of being a leader. That sort of stuff is not taught to people. You've obviously had to learn that along the way in your career, that's what works for you.
Yeah, and it's like, anything, if it's too complicated, we don't do it. If we have simple habits, simple rules, then, certainly for me that works. So, I come back to some, really simple principles around, care for people, create context. You can almost never communicate too much, and then kind of run a fairly tight ship. People need cohesion and direction. So have some effectiveness methodologies that you can use to keep things running. If you do those sort of 3 or 4 things consistently, you will be a great leader. It's the consistency in managing that through the distraction and busyness of corporate roles today that's the challenge.
I want to change direction a little bit and talk a bit about how difficult leaders are to find. And all my listeners will know that over the last few seasons, we've talked about this skills crisis in security and the inability for leaders to find security staff. And I'm sure there's been other industries and other verticals that have experienced this exact same thing across the centuries. So in your opinion, what role do things like workforce planning have in ensuring that we find the right staff when we need them?
And there's no doubt info security is a growth, high demand sector. The supply demand is out of whack, and I think this COVID-19 crisis has shown that up again. So great career for people to have chosen, because I think it's going to be an in-demand skill set. Workforce planning, is a important exercise, but it's a point-in-time exercise, particularly in a dynamic market. Things can change reasonably quickly. The environment I've come from in most of my career, mining, is famous for its cycles. 1 year versus the next year can be massively different, and you can't predict that. You can have the best workforce plans in the world, but it's difficult to predict. The lessons I've learnt there is to think flexibly about where you get your people from and how you grow skill sets. And my favourite example over the years was truck drivers in the Bowen Basin of Queensland. Always a massive shortage in the mining boom. We actually thought very laterally about that, and we were able to access the stay-at-home partners of the miners who were in town, who previously weren't able to come onto site and work because the shifts precluded them from that, because it was not very sympathetic to picking up kids from school. So in the mining boom, when there literally wasn't anybody else to drive the trucks, we changed shift patterns. All of a sudden we had school-friendly hour shifts, so the non-working partners of the miners could come and work those hours. Cross-skill, train people up very quickly. So necessity being the mother of invention at times, I'd encourage people in this sector to think broadly about where people can come from a skill set and background perspective, what can be trained, what can be learnt, and how maybe you could bring in some people who maybe you hadn't thought of before. I think the other thing that we'll see more of in the future is remote and dispersed teams. Obviously, we've all learnt how to work from home rapidly over the last little while, and organisations have become more comfortable with that. So where are the untapped skill sets that we're not currently finding people both onshore and offshore? Are there hidden pockets of talent that we could be thinking about in this area?
And I guess one of the outcomes of maybe not being able to find the right sort of people is relying heavily on outsource situations as well, where if you can't attract the right staff or resources to support the execution of strategies, I guess outsourcing or really trying to understand what the best model is has become quite important. From an operating model perspective, what's been your experience in the value and implementation of good operating models, really understanding, what do we need in-house, what do we need outsourced? And I guess for listeners, it's probably a good place to start in what is an operating model and how do we get them to work well for us?
Yeah, I might start with what an operating model isn't. It isn't just structure. So structure is part of it, absolutely, but I think of an operating model as the integrated engine that drives the execution of strategy in a business. So it's the ecosystem of things that you deliberately architect to deliver your strategy. So it goes from, certainly org design and structure is part of that, but it also touches on culture, governance, capability, to your point before, measures and rewards, how that works, and then lastly, process, systems and tools. Now, all of that comes together in hopefully in a way that creates a mutually reinforcing ecosystem. And unless we think deliberately about all of those things and how they join together, you tend to get a lot of rub and waste in organisations. Now, people wouldn't articulate that as an operating model problem often. They'll talk about clunky process or bureaucracy or siloed behaviour or capability gaps or whatever. Essentially, if you go right back, perhaps we haven't thought about architecting the operating model in a way that supports the strategy execution.
So would you say that's one of the common mistakes that occur with operating models?
Yeah, 100%. People, unfortunately, it's not a topic that is well understood or well explained. So hopefully I did a reasonable job before. It's something that I'm really passionate about. People often see it as structure. And, all of a sudden you go from, we should do an operating model, to next minute someone's, got a whiteboard marker and they're drawing lines on a, org chart. That's the common mistake, but that, structure is sort of 10 steps down the line of a thought process where we think about what is the integrated system that this business needs to build to execute the strategy, thinking deeply about capability, what's in-source, what's outsourced, what's the clarity of accountability that we need between teams. And often in those processes where we literally sit down and think about what work needs to be done, what's the process that supports that work, how do we know what good looks like, you actually flash out work that's being done that actually doesn't need to be done, that could be then the energy could be diverted into more important areas, investment could be more important capability. So much of what we do in organisations tends to be historical legacy. We've always done it that way, until we actually sit down and document who does what and why, how is that building to the strategy or delivering the strategy, how is that reinforced by the way we pay people, the way we structure our governance processes, our budgeting processes. You end up just with this engine that doesn't run well in executing strategy. So I'm a big proponent of the value of deep thinking about operating models and then consistent execution, over the course of years to really create an organisation that runs smoothly.
I just want to pick up on something that you said then around, making decisions around who's in the team, who's not in the team, and what we pay people. So I often find organisations will have a policy around benchmarking of roles, and particularly senior ones. So why is it that when a market's going to dictate a salary anyway, that we then go through a benchmarking process? I mean, what do you see as the value in that?
Salary benchmarking is as much art as it is science. Organisationally, you need to have facts and data around how you pay your people, and there's certainly a market reference point in terms of a particular skill set, but there's also internal relativities that it's important to manage, that things sort of make sense. In a high demand, high growth area like InfoSec, it is tricky, absolutely, because the market moves quickly, people are in demand, really good people are hard to find. So in looking at benchmarking for a skill set like InfoSec, I would take multiple data points, multiple surveys. I would be asking recruiters what they're seeing, because often the surveys can be 12 months old. What are you seeing in the market? This is what I think we need. What's the market paying for this? And then make sure when you go looking for a role that you are looking within a range. You've got a range of salary that you're prepared to pay, having those conversations early internally, and then listening to the market as it comes through. There'll always be outliers who are, fortunate enough to be paid, extremely well as an outlier, and you shouldn't, base your benchmarking on that, but you should have enough data points that you're educated about what the market's paying. So
where do some people go wrong, do you think? Like, what are some of the gotchas with relying on benchmarking?
I think to see it as more science than it really is. As I said, it's a mix of art and science. Relying blindly on one survey or only a very small sample is dangerous. It's like anything. once you get under the cover of data, you can sometimes see that the survey is either not robust, there's not enough sample roles. So get really curious about where the data is coming from. So if your HR team's saying, here's the range, okay, where's it coming from? Who are our peer companies? How many roles like this is the survey referencing? Make sure that there is, some integrity to the survey, and there's as many survey inputs as you can get and as many surveys as you can access. But then also, make sure that it's not a narrow range. As I said, I think it's important to have a range and then be open to being flexible.
So if we've got the right operating model, we've got the right people in the right roles, we're not doing the work that we shouldn't be doing, we've benchmarked them, we're paying them the right amount, how do we then hang on to them? What would be your top 3 retention strategies or top 3 things, great ways you've seen to retain leaders and professionals?
I think this is particularly true in highly technical specialised roles like InfoSec. I mean, the development in work is critical. Where people can, work for, pretty much anybody in corporate Australia, from startups to, ASX top 10 these days with your type of skill set, to feel like you're being developed in role. It's not about going on a course. It's about great work every day is really, really important. So organisations need to be making sure that people really see the value of that in-role development. We all know from all of the surveys that people leave leaders. People will leave organisations most often because of their leader. So the obligation on organisations to create, great work and great strategy and great purpose and inspire and align is really important. But leaders need to inspire and motivate every day. They need to create an environment where people feel that they're trusted and that they have the ability to innovate and be creative, that the leader's got their back. So that's absolutely critical. And I think all of those things go together into a cake that, hopefully is something that people will stick around for.
I want to finish up with something that's quite topical, and I usually keep the podcast a bit evergreen, but particularly obviously at the moment with coronavirus or COVID-19, I'd love to ask you about what changes you see in the workplace and I guess with our lens over it, what do you think that might mean for information security?
Your cohort's privileged to be in a role that's, even I would expect even going to be in high demand going forward. I mean, I think I've certainly been reading, you guys will be closer to it, there's an increase in, all the bad guy action that happens out there in phishing and hacking and all those sorts of things. So I think it's even going to be more important now. There's no doubt acceleration of digital trends, remote working from home, that creates challenges, I think, for organisations to keep, behaviours and focus on InfoSec at the front. So I think the demand and importance of your function is only increasing, which I think is exciting. I think more broadly, the world of work will be forever changed. Organisations are heading into a much more volatile future. Volatility means that organisations need to be flexible, they need to be innovative, they need to be able to work remotely. The exciting opportunity, I think, in that is that you can have the ability to tap into capability in a more diverse way than we've done before, disaggregated teams. I think that's quite an exciting opportunity for organisations to really jump into. So I think it's a really exciting time for your function, but also for work in general. This is the first time everybody's doing it, though, so it's a scary time. It's a stressful time for organisations, and it's a time where leaders need to step up and build trust, create an environment where people can be innovative and flexible because people are solving problems that they've never had to solve before.
I think it's a really good point from a leader perspective that, a lot of this is very new to us. And if we sort of loop back to where we came in at the start around leaders being role models and always trying to be conscious of the fact that their behaviour is being watched. I mean, in a time like this where everybody's seeing each other through, the camera on their laptop, it's probably even more important for our leadership skills to be honed and for us to be conscious of that sort of thing, given that we are in a completely new way of working. And as you said, the digital side of thing is not going to go away.
Yeah, I mean, leading people is hard when you're seeing them every day and they're sitting, in the same workstation as you, and it's exponentially harder when people are remote. I personally think it opens up exciting possibilities, but again, every time we do something new, it's scary and people have to learn a new skill set. So I think leaders in this point have a unique opportunity to think deliberately about how they show up, what they want to take forward into the brave, new, volatile world that we are entering, and frankly, what they want to leave behind. And that's the exciting, period that we're in over the next, probably 6 months.
Well, I love your positive outlook, Jo. It's very refreshing and optimistic. And I want to really thank you for your time today on the podcast and for sharing what's such an interesting and important topic around leadership and building leaders. So thank you so much for sharing, and all the best with the People Collective. I look forward to watching it grow.
Thank you, Claire. It's been my pleasure.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for listening. For more information on all our guests, check out the show notes at thesecurecio.com, where you can also find more information on the Secure CIO framework and sign up for my newsletter. If you loved the show, please subscribe to the podcast and feel free to leave me a 5-star rating. I'll see you next week.